All right, good to have you guys aboard. Let me just go ahead and give you a quick snapshot of today's episode so some of you can move on to another episode of your favorite podcast while there'll be a little small group of people that will want to listen to this. So basically, to make a long story short, I've got about 90 different albums in my iTunes, Apple Music to listen to and enjoy, and one thing they all have in common with one another is they're all at least 18 years old, some of them going back into the 80s, because I just realized, my gosh, of course, there's a lot of bands that I have missed through the ages, combination of just missing bands, obviously. There's still tons of good bands that I wish after hearing that I would have heard a long time ago, but that's just the nature of music. But add on top of that, I went through a season of my life where I wasn't even allowed to listen to anything outside of the Christian music industry. So, you hear one too many good bands that took place back in the day, and if you're a big music fan, kind of piques your interest a little bit, and you got to go back and do some homework. So that's kind of what this episode is about. It's with my brother Jared and a good friend of mine, Logan, who both, I would say, even take music more serious than I do with their research and all of that. And so just to whet your appetite before we go into the episode, for example, my brother's bands that he thinks are the most important in the indie scene of all time. And obviously he came up with this list, in a few hours. So I'm sure if he put a little more thought into it, maybe it would change a little bit, but it seems pretty comprehensive to me. I asked him to narrow it down to 5, and he did 7. And that's Nirvana, Pixies, Fugazi, Sonic Youth, Kraftwerk, Black Sabbath, Stooges, and Velvet Underground. So super cool conversation, not only about a lot of different bands in the scene, but also where different genres came from and evolved from and all of that. So welcome to the Svendsen, and for you old Pastor with No Answer listeners, thank you guys for sticking around. And yeah, things have changed a lot. Here's what I'm enjoying. Listen to the last few episodes if you want to hear about some of the things that I am up to. And I love dropping in on this podcast feed called the Svendsen and doing fun things that I enjoy, because as much as I enjoy Bad Christian, we kind of got a formula that we're after, and always trying to fine tune it and keep the rawness and keep it going good, and just a lot of things to think through. Whereas I don't need another podcast to think a bunch of stuff through. I just need a podcast so I can just get on there and vent and have fun. So hope you guys enjoy. Peace.
So I was telling Jared just now, Logan, that it was crazy. I don't know if it was a year or two ago, but I don't go see music that often, and I'm starting to grow out of that snobby phase. So at least for me, I went through this stage where all I wanted to do was go see shows. I mean, I would drive hours and hours. Me and Jared back in the late 90s, we would take big road trips. And then I just kind of got in a phase where I was like, I'd just rather listen to it. I guess I just feel too busy to go to a show. Once I went to the show, though, I was really, really happy. But now I'm getting to the point where it's more interesting, because I think I've kind of been in situations with Bad Christian where I've seen shows because I've been a part of activities in which there was lineups and all that stuff. But I told even throughout all of this, I said there's 2 bands that I would take a road trip for, and both of those daggum musicians came through where Jared lived, and that was Radiohead and Dinosaur Jr. within like a week of each other. And those are the 2 bands that at this point in my life, I would definitely take some pretty significant strides to go see. And I can't say that about a bunch of bands. A Clarity reunion show, for sure, sign me up. Jimmy Eat World playing just their stuff now? Probably not.
If Mineral came by close, would you consider seeing them?
Yes.
Okay.
But a big reason why is... So I would have considered seeing them on like a reunion show with their old stuff, but now having heard their new stuff, I'm like, if Mineral started putting out music regularly, if those 2 songs have any say in what it would sound like, they'd probably be one of my best bands.
Yeah.
I like Jared, you and Logan, I know you thought similar. Jared, you read an article on Indian Serenading, and I forgot what it was that Chris Simpson did so meticulously. I think he spent it may be days and days and days and days on the vocal work by itself and re-record. I forgot what it was, but when I listen to the simplicity and what he pulls off on those two Mineral songs, that's what my head goes to. Is I don't know why it seems this way, but it seems like he spent hours perfectly crafting those vocals.
Yeah.
And
Nothing's wasted.
Yeah,
it's
and we had him
perfectly-
on Bad Christian, and as a person, he's fun, but like when you hear someone as a musician first and then you talk to them as a person, you're thinking you're going to talk to like Martin Luther King sort of charisma.
Right. Yeah.
Because they're so awesome with music. You think personality, and I'm joking around. I think the guy was super cool, but it's just so fascinating how some people are meant to speak through their music. That's how their brilliance is put out there. It's unreal. Well, Logan, you love those Mineral songs, right?
Yeah, I thought they were great, but yeah, I wasn't surprised in the least that he was kind of an oddball. I mean, you don't get good at playing music and writing songs by going to parties, you know?
Right.
You hang out in your room alone and practice your guitar and draw and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not surprised. I mean, look at your coworkers in Bad Christian. Those guys don't know anything about new music. They haven't paid attention to music since, you know, your glory days at Winthrop.
Right.
They have no comment on any.
Toby's come around, by the way, just to update you on your friend Toby. He is. I think Matt's not really all that listening, but Toby's actually into it big time. But you're right. They went through a big 10-year drought where it almost wasn't fun anymore. I was like, well, I'm not talking to you guys about music.
Yeah. Like when I toured with them, I filled out their best of lists at the end of the year for them because they had no idea.
Totally. Or they would have put like Garth Brooks, Kenny Chesney.
Matt put a Dierks Bentley album on his best of list.
So
back then.
So Logan, let me give you a little breakdown on how this or why this episode is even being done. I had some fellow high school classmates reminiscing online about the Lemonheads coming back through Charleston. And they said that when they were seniors, so that was when I was a senior too. These were two friends of mine. They said that when the Lemonheads came through Charleston back in the day, it was not an all-age show. So they could not get in. And Erin, the girl, she actually even said she wrote an essay, you know, about how unfair it was that, you know, kids underage couldn't get in. They even recall putting their ears up against the Music Farms wall to just be able to hear a little bit of it. And so I chimed in a little bit, and then Teenage Fan Club was brought up, and I was like, man, I'd actually never checked them out. And my friend Kevin was going on about how awesome they were. So I'm thinking, so basically, Priscilla and I, we end up joining in on the Lemonhead action in the summer, mainly to hang out with some old friends. But I started getting interested. I was like, you know, I never really checked out that band. I remember the cover of Mrs. Robinson. And then I thought Teenage Fan Club, I never even heard them. And so here I am, an Apple Music guy. I can just listen to all this stuff without having to buy it. And I'm telling you, I'm like, the Lemonheads, oh my gosh, this is unbelievable stuff. Teenage Fan Club, this is so cool. And so then Priscilla and I, we go to Norway, and on their little, international travel, they've got 1 billion songs and movies and all that stuff to listen to. So I decide, you know, it's been a while since I've tried to check out the Pixies. You know, the last time I listened to them, it was just a little too far off for me. And I start listening to them. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. How can this be so good? And then at that point, I made a commitment. All right, I've got to at least find the low-hanging fruit of stuff that I've just totally missed out on, because my brother and I went through a huge stage where we weren't even allowed to listen to secular music. Jared snuck it sometimes, and I did not. So we missed out on a huge chunk of music, being able to listen to it at liberty. But then when I went off to college, Tooth and Nail, and I don't know, Logan, how familiar you are with its origins, but Tooth and Nail, the band that Emery ended up on, yeah, they were cranking out some unbelievable music. So for me, it was a win-win. It was like, okay, I can still listen to Christian music. Oh, but now it can be good. So there's not even really a pull to listen to anything else, because why listen to anything else? But you'll get a kick out of this. Just a year ago, I asked Jared to put together a grunge best of, because outside of Nevermind, I never invested in any grunge albums because I couldn't. I wasn't allowed to. And then when I went off to college, I wasn't interested. And so I learned in 2018 that I'm a huge Stone Temple Pilots fan.
That was actually my first show.
Are you serious?
Yes, when they were turning off Purple.
Yeah, so I put this out there on on BC Club, and I was just like, hey, you guys tell me what are some bands that I need to check out, basically in the 80s and 90s. And two bands that people threw out there that I'm glad that I've checked out is Codeine and the Wrens. Those are two bands that, for those guys, those were monumental bands. I never even heard of them. And so then Jared throws me, all the stuff that he's been throwing me all along for the last 10 years that I haven't really paid attention to. And probably half of them I'm now just totally into. I mean, one of them being Quicksand. I don't even know what genre of music Quicksand came from. I don't know if they were on the latter days of grunge or if they helped kick grunge. I don't know.
Post-hardcore.
It's post-hardcore?
Yeah. I would say that, yeah, they have hardcore roots. There was this weird time in the 90s when hardcore and grunge kind of mixed. And so you have a lot of weird bands like Quicksand, which Quicksand's most recent album was great. I was very skeptical, but it was so good.
Yeah, is that the one that, Jared, you recommended me, or you didn't recommend it specifically?
I think I did. It came out last year, I believe.
Okay, no, I'm
Yeah,
I'm actually listening currently.
Yeah, I recommended
Slip.
Yeah, that's the one I recommended, but I think I
Slip's
told
great.
You about Quicksand's newest one that came out like last year or the year before.
Okay, yeah, I have to check that out. So I started getting into all these bands. I mean, the list just goes on and on, all these bands I've been checking out, but it made me think, and I want to get more into what you were saying, Logan, as far as grunge and hardcore and all of that. But so the two things that I kind of want to tackle is, where did everything come from? And I know that art is not something you can trace scientifically. This is just a fun conversation. I know half of the stuff I'm saying is just completely speculative, but I want to kind of see how we can connect the dots from one thing to another, or one band being super significant and affecting this day and age. But I also would love to I forgot what the second thing I want to do. So Jared, you'll have to edit this. Oh, the other thing that I want, you don't have to edit it. The other thing I want to discuss is, were there bands that should be seen as more creators than borrowers? And those are very novice words for someone that's not into the music scene. But what you have going on in the music scene, everybody's borrowing from everybody. Everybody's influencing everybody. That's not a ripoff. Now, some people are ripping off.
You mean innovators, right?
Yeah.
Innovators.
Yeah. But everybody is being influenced by everybody and affected by everybody. But there had to have been some bands that when they took the stage and somebody's hearing them from the first time, they're like, where did that come from? I've never even seen such a thing, heard such a thing, because they were such innovators. They did have a huge hand in creating punk. Are there bands that when they played a show, you came and you're like, I don't know what kind of music to call that? Oh, they're calling it punk. Like, did that happen with some bands, or was everything birthed like from this evolutionary process to where we don't even know who those major contributors are? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it seems to me like, based on the way you're phrasing this question, we should probably launch into what we think are the top 5 most influential bands. So the question you posed to us through text.
Yeah.
That's probably the best way to kind of facilitate our responses.
Yeah. I like it. So let's get Jared's list first. So basically, how I phrase this is, in your opinion, and you get to define indie however you want to, if you want to include punk and hardcore and all that stuff or not, whatever, who are the 5 most important bands? And so you actually even get to put the definition of important on there. But obviously,
I did it more from important to me.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
I didn't. So that'll be a good distinction. Distinction.
Yeah, that will be. Yeah. So, Jared, what are your bands that you think is most important to the music scene?
Yeah, so I actually picked 8 but I can cluster a few of them together.
Well,
to
let's
make it
hear
fun.
them all. You can't screw us
Okay,
on those three.
so let's go back to the 60s. I would say Velvet Underground, to me, they're the ones who started to amplify their music. They had that raw sound. I think they were kind of doing their own scene. They were, buddies with Andy Warhol. They were part of that artistic avant-garde scene. I think they had maybe they were the first band to have that kind of indie alternative mindset.
Yeah.
I would also lump early 70s the Stooges. I think they could be considered the first proto-punk band. The energy of Iggy Pop and the Stooges, if you listen to that album, 1970 album, I forget what it's called, but it has that. I think it's one of the first albums to have that punk rock spirit. So kind of a proto-punk band.
So
yeah.
to just dip into my thought just a second ago. So with that being said, then some people back in the day went to a Stooges show and walked out of there thinking, what kind of music was that?
Right.
Like,
what the hell just happened?
So do you do think that probably happened?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I mean, I wasn't there. I mean, this is before I was even born.
That thought is so interesting to me. Just that concept is so intriguing, and I see it on the same level. I don't think you and I were shocked from a standpoint of where did this music come from, but it was a similar response when we were at that Roadside Monument concert, and all of a sudden this guy is screaming the most rawest, sick vocals, and you've got someone singing beautiful melody. For you and I, Jared, we walked away being like, that's the first time we've experienced something like that. I don't think we walked away saying, oh my gosh, we just saw someone create a new genre, but that was new to us, and it blew our minds. And so I could only imagine walking out of a punk show and being like, oh my gosh. And I think Scattered Few at Cornerstone 91, that was the first time we were able to see the stage diving and the punk attitude and just the rawness, and you just want to hit people. And it's like, we never experienced that before. So it left an impact. All right, so the Stooges, Velvet Underground.
I didn't say Black Sabbath. I'm a huge metalhead, so I feel like Black Sabbath may have been the first band to really kind of borrow from blues rock, but then crank up that doomy, thick guitar sounds, the really kind of dark lyrics. So I think they're kind of the first proto-metal band. Another band from the 70s that I feel like, because electronic music is so big today, I feel like Kraftwerk is one of those bands that, love them or hate them, they really were innovators in combining electronic music with pop. So I would definitely say
Kraftwerk?
Kraftwerk, yeah.
I never even heard of them.
You've definitely heard them though. I mean, have you seen, I mean, it's been on a ton of commercials, that electronic song where the guy has like weird vocal effects, fun on the Autobahn?
Yeah.
That's them.
Okay.
And then my last three are more like our era. I would say, I would say Sonic Youth. I just feel like I kind of see them kind of a direct connection to Velvet Underground in the sense they're from New York, and they were very much in the artistic scene, like avant-garde art, I guess the art, literary, all that stuff combined. But they did a lot of really cool things with guitars. I think that kind of maybe informed Dinosaur Jr. and Pixies later on, heavily distorted, but also, keeping some melody in there, bringing in some pop elements. And then I would put Fugazi, because I think Fugazi did a very cool thing with taking the rage of hardcore, but at the same time introducing more of an introspective lyrical approach that kind of linked it to emo. And then also Pixies. I would have Pixies there because I feel like they informed 90s alternative rock. And then my last one, I guess, is the lowest hanging fruit of them all, is Nirvana. I mean, I feel like 90s alternative radio was basically spawned from Nirvana. So those would be my top 8.
It's so much fun. Like, there's like a small group of people that are going to be listening to this and having as much fun as I am right now. And then there's going to be people like, why does this matter?
Who cares?
But I love the fact that a band that I was in high school to witness blowing up is a part of that list. And I think legitimately so. It definitely belongs in the argument. And that's neat for me to be, I wasn't aware of the Pixies or Fugazi. I certainly didn't live through Stooges and Black Sabbath and all that, but like I remember Nirvana's hype, and they were that influential. That's neat. Now, was it hard leaving Metallica out, or
it's
not
funny
so
that you
much?
say that, because I was writing this down by genre, and so I had Black Sabbath, and right underneath them I had Metallica, Slayer, Morbid Angel, Mayhem, and Ministry, because I feel like they're the ones who led into thrash, death metal, black metal, and industrial music. So I had them right under Black Sabbath.
Yeah, and then I'm not as knowledgeable of the scene as you are. Why not Dinosaur Jr.? Because Sonic Youth is just so much more significant.
Okay, I lost you. I'm sorry, I lost you for a second. What'd you say?
So basically, I'm just saying, you know the genre more than I do. Why not Dinosaur Jr.? Is it because Sonic Youth is the main band in that era that set everything else off?
This is ignorance on my part too, because I could be wrong on this, but I feel like Sonic Youth's first stuff came out in the early 80s, whereas Dinosaur Jr., I think his first album was 85. So I think they preceded Dinosaur Jr. by 2 or 3 years. So that's probably the main reason why.
Yeah. All right. So, Logan, before you go into any of your stuff, comment on any of that stuff, like any big time thumbs up or big time thumbs down.
Well, yeah, all those bands rule. I mean, I can't say that anyone else's list isn't right.
But there's none of them that stand out as, oh, I don't see that one. I mean, these are all, to you, pretty given.
I think all of those bands are great. I love every one of them.
I cannot believe I've never heard of one of them. That's what puzzles me. Kraftwerk. I've just never heard. I've never heard of them.
I mean, like I said, though, you've heard of more than you'd ever know.
Right. And I do need to listen to Velvet Underground and Stooges. Here's what I think is really neat about a lot of this older stuff is, for some reason, it seems easier to pick up on whether or not I'm going to like it. Like, it's like, and maybe that comes as just a longtime music listener, but it's like, y'all know how those albums back in the day that if you hadn't had been patient with, you never would have found the gem, and now they're like your favorite. It's like, I think most of the times now, the three of us, but I'll speak for me, I don't need that much time to know whether or not it's going to benefit me. Like, I can tell, this is never going to grow. And it seems like these older bands, it's even easier. Like, I can listen to the Pixies and be like, oh, I love this. And then there was a Smog. Somebody recommended the band Smog. I listened to it, like 3 songs. I was like, I'm just never going to like this. Have y'all heard of Smog? I've never heard of Smog. Yeah, that's another one that people cite as one of the more significant bands.
Okay.
I'm surprised by that. I bet, though, that if you would listen to, because Smog is just one person.
Yeah.
And so I bet if you were to listen to Bill Callahan, where he got rid of the Smog moniker and just started going by his name, you would probably really like Bill Callahan.
Yeah. I'll have to check it out. By the way, do y'all like what's the Stephen Malkmus? Do y'all like his new weird electronic stuff? Y'all listen to it?
No, I haven't liked any of his solo projects, but I guess that's a good lead-in because Pavement is the number one on my list.
Number one. And so this list is basically important bands to you personally, right?
Yeah.
But but also make a case for why they're important in general too.
I'm not going to.
Sure.
I don't care if people don't like it. They're huge to me. They're an incredible indie band. I feel like they are very influential due to the fact that they definitely approached their music with a sense of humor, and they were kind of sloppy, which added to how great they were.
Yeah.
They weren't technical musicians.
Yeah.
Or highly technical musicians. They just were having fun. But I would
and you have to be good songwriters.
Yeah, well, they were great songwriters.
Yeah.
But hey, Logan, what's your favorite album by them, out of curiosity?
I mean, I think Enchanted, but I know that there's like the 4 main seminal albums, and I loved all of them. I mean, even Terror Twilight, which a lot of people weren't that into, I loved it. And I think for me, it was just because, they moved to Portland at the height of their popularity. And so I would see Stephen Malkmus just, walking down the street when I was in high school. I just thought that was so cool. I went and got coffee with some friends, and he was there, and just being a dumb high school kid, I went up and talked to him, and he wasn't, he didn't blow me off like some of the other Portland bands that I would see and love. And, they didn't want to talk to some dumb kid. He was just really cool.
Part of your healthy self-esteem is due to Stephen Malkmus. Of course, Pavement's important to you, man. You get him, Logan.
I mean, they're the best. But the Pixies were definitely on my list as well. Neutral Milk Hotel was probably one of the first indie rock that In the Airplane Over the Sea was one of the first ones that I listened to and thought it was just like unreal. Because at that point I was pretty firmly into punk rock and hardcore, and I couldn't believe that something like that existed.
That's pretty cool. I love that.
Then, yeah, that's one of the best albums. That's from your guys' neck of the woods too.
Yeah.
Then also I went and saw one of the bands on my list on Monday, Low. And
yes.
Low, when I first heard them, I did not like them. But once again, that was also, they were a little too slow for my taste because I was pretty much primarily listening to hardcore and punk rock. And in fact, I only went because of a girl. And a friend of mine was also there because of a girl. And because Low was so slow and quiet, I was just talking to my friend in the back, and they shushed me from the stage. That's how quiet they were. And I couldn't believe anyone liked them. But later on, I got into them and went back and listened to all of their stuff and can really enjoy their slow stuff at this point. But
that's awesome.
I think
that really is. That's crazy because I think a lot of hardcore punk people can relate to kind of transitioning. Like, wait a second, I don't really like this kind. I love this.
Yeah,
this is awesome.
Yeah, girls will have that effect on you sometimes.
Yep.
That's how I started listening to emo, was because of a girl. I thought it was the worst stuff I've ever heard in my life, and then
it was
just
funny when. Well, all right. Give your last band because I do think emo needs to be talked about a little bit. But so after Low,
I have a tie.
Okay.
It's a 3-way tie: Elliott Smith, Yo La Tengo, and Archers of Loaf.
Oh, I like Archers of Loaf a lot. Oh, I like all of those bands you just named. Yeah, that's a big time tie. So it's Elliott Smith, Archers of Loaf, and who else did you say?
Yo La Tengo.
Okay.
Yo La Tengo, yeah. And in fact, I think Archers of Loaf was probably one of the first indie bands I ever saw. I went and saw Weezer touring on their Blue album when I was a sophomore, and Archers of Loaf was opening, and I was just like, who's this tall, gangly dork? This is awesome. And so I went out and got, I think it was Vivi. They were touring on Vivi, and it was just so cool.
I don't know hardly anything about that band other than the Icky Metal is one of my favorite albums, and that's all I know about them.
Well, they're from South Carolina.
Are they really?
Yeah.
Dang.
In fact, cool. they would regularly, just because I would follow them. They would regularly do benefits against Jesse Helms and stuff like that. They would play these like music benefits to raise money for whoever was running against him.
Gosh, that's crazy. I did not know that they were even active or anything. That's neat. So there's so many different places to jump around. So let's
if you want to talk about emo, I mean, I mentioned when I said Fugazi, I think Fugazi might have been, along with Embrace and Rites of Spring, they were kind of the proto emo bands that led up to like Sunny Day Real Estate and the whole 90s wave of emo.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think why emo needs to be addressed specifically is, and I don't know what the years are, but I can give some good estimates, like what the three of us are likely talking about when we say emo is this music that existed from 90 or late 80s to 2000 or late 90s at the very latest, what most people think of when they hear emo is Taking Back Sunday, Brand New. And I'm not taking anything away from those bands. That's just not what we think of when we hear emo. We think of almost like to me, emo seemed, and I don't, this, how was it birthed? It almost seemed like we don't want to be pissed off punks anymore. And we don't want to be so crazy political. We just want to be sad about the girl we broke up with, play pretty music, but then scream sometimes. But we don't want the hardcore vibe. I mean,
that's not entirely true though. I think what Jared was saying about Fugazi and Embrace being proto-emo, that's true. But the term emo actually came from, it's short for emotive hardcore. So it was people screaming about their feelings instead of being political or tough guys or whatever. So the first emo bands were screamy as hell. But then
who were some of them? Like Fugazi you're talking about? Or because Jawbox wasn't really a screamer.
I feel like the emo label got added to those guys retroactively because there wasn't really a name for what they were doing, or maybe they were just considered indie rock, or they were in the hardcore scene.
But I think too, I think Jive Like Jehu, Antioch Arrow, those bands were probably early 90s and very, very much screamo for sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I agree with that. But yeah, I think that emo initially was really hardcore, and I wish that I could think of some examples, but they're kind of escaping me. I can only think of later examples where screamo had already been tagged, but these bands were considered emo bands. Like Orchid is a super chaotic emo
super
band.
Awesome band, yeah.
Super
City of
awesome.
Caterpillar. Have you heard them?
Yeah.
City of Caterpillar, yeah.
I went and
Circle
saw
Takes a Square.
They did a reunion, City of Caterpillar, last year. I went and saw it. It was pretty rad.
Wow,
in fact,
nice.
I have one of my favorite screamo bands is doing a reunion in April that I can't wait to go to. Page 99.
Page 99, okay.
Yeah.
Great bands. And that's like late 90s, early 2000s, right? Those bands?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. But there was a bunch of stuff going on, like just super. It's even hard to listen to now because the recordings were so terrible. But bands like, I don't know, Ordination of Aaron or I'm having a lapse in memory. But yeah, there was some emo bands that were more chaotic than the hardcore bands that I would listen to.
So with these bands, did they precede like Rites of Spring and Embrace chronologically or around the same time?
No, people didn't start using. No, Rites of Spring was way before. They were probably 5 or 6 years before.
Gotcha.
Yeah, all of these bands that are being mentioned for people that are kind of in this sphere of music listening. You're wanting to investigate new music. All of these bands are pretty much. The point of this conversation is talking about the most significant band. So if you're into looking for new music, go after that one for sure. That's one that Jared recommended recently. Rites of Spring, I think it's called, right, Jared?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So it seems like, so here's my with zero research and not as much knowledge as you guys have on this. It seems like maybe the best thing to put a big umbrella over everything, it seems like maybe punk. Like if anything, if all of this stuff came from one thing, that's what I have in my head. Like it seems like maybe the punk and some of the British stuff, like the Cure or wherever the Cure came from, those older bands, seems like all of that was occupying a space. And it seems like punk maybe birthed hardcore and metal, or metal first, and then or is Black Sabbath and the Stooges completely 100% on two different islands? I don't know. Like, and so I'm curious. Like one thing that I was thinking about is I wasn't tuned into Dinosaur Jr. and the lo-fi scene, mainly because I couldn't listen to anything but Christian music. But once I started to listen to a lot of the emo and I was in college and listening to whatever I wanted to, I was so interested in that genre of that raw emo. I wasn't interested in kind of the Dinosaur Jr., Guided by Voices, Pixies, and all that stuff. But it seems like they all belong to the same family. It just was that the emo was kind of concentrating on a certain direction. But would y'all put them all in the same family? And like
Absolutely.
kind of give your best stab at the chronological order of all of this stuff. I mean, is punk kind of the first initiator of all this indie stuff?
I mean, chronological order, rock or rockabilly from the 50s, you know? I mean, This was all it just came from people saying, hey, that's pretty cool. This is how I do it.
Yeah.
You know, like there was they didn't start getting popular until decades later even, but I mean, there was this Detroit punk band way before it was early 70s called Death. And it was three brothers. There's this great documentary on Netflix about it. But three brothers from Detroit that went and saw an Alice Cooper show and was like, whoa, that was cool. Let's do that. And it's straight up punk rock, like 3-chord, just super fast. But it was just some 7-inches that never really got released. So it's just, punk has been around for a long time. It's just didn't gain popularity until the late 70s.
All right, so let's.
And I would argue too that the commonality you're seeing, I think, is a spirit of punk. I think that punk is a very reactionary scene where the musicians are seeing all the bullshit around them with the pop culture, pop music, and a lot of times it's like saying, screw that. We're going to rage against that, and we're going to put forth the most obnoxious, loud, brash music we can come up with as a reaction against the mainstream. I think that might be a common element throughout, is this punk spirit of being pissed off with the world.
Definitely.
Well, and here's what's so interesting about that, Jared, is this is the first time, and you know this is how long I've been listening nonstop to hip hop. It's pretty much been 65-70% hip hop, 30% everything else. And this is the first season of my life where I'm listening to more of a different genre. Like basically 70% is all of these bands we're talking about, but I realized it's got a similar punk vibe to hip hop. And during the regular course of my day, I am really energized by stuff that's super emotional, maybe even angry, or maybe something that I can be like, this is just kick ass and this makes me feel good. Like, I realize that Dinosaur Jr. does the same thing for me that Tupac does. I mean, it's like a punk vibe of, we're doing things how people are telling us not to do it. This is how we are. It is just a vibe there, I think. You know. Yeah. So let's take. Go ahead, Logan.
But I'll say this, just as far as tying things together. You keep mentioning Dinosaur Jr. and how different they were. They were originally released on the label that Black Flag created. Yeah. SST. Like, SST was a hardcore label, but Dinosaur Jr. was on it.
That's cool. And I keep saying Dinosaur Jr. honestly because they're probably my favorite, and that's why I keep using them as examples for sure. So that's so cool, man. That reminds me of when I found out that the All American Rejects' first album, which was a pop success,
on Doghouse,
big time. It was on Doghouse first, and what's so crazy is it took me so long to get around to listening to that album. When I finally did, I was like, this is unbelievable pop genius. If it would have came out on Doghouse, I would have listened to that bad boy right away. I would have never listened to the Bleed American or I would have never listened to Jimmy Eat World if they came out originally on a major label, because of how snobby I was with
They did. Music. It was Capitol Records.
That's right.
But Big Wheel did the vinyl.
So wait, Static Prevails was Capitol Records. That's right. And then after Clarity, they weren't selling enough, and so they got dropped. But Bleed American was written for an indie label. They were no longer on a major label. But then when the major labels heard Bleed American, they're like, no, we're signing this. This is too good. And sure enough, for the major labels, that was a win, because In the Middle was, a huge hit. Well, but Bleed American was not written.
no band writes an album saying this is going to be a major label, this is going to be an indie. They
Right.
did get dropped from Capitol, but DreamWorks picked them up immediately.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. So it had nothing to do with the album.
No, well, it probably did.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm sure that they had those songs in their, under their belt. But yeah, it didn't come out on an indie before that.
Gotcha. No. I know it didn't come out. I just thought they were. Well, I guess what I mean by that is they were writing the album with the intentions of releasing it on an indie, because I think at that point there was no interest. But I could be wrong. It could have been.
I would imagine that they just were writing the album with the intentions of it being released.
Yeah, totally. And I just think that what's so neat though, and I guess I'm calling hypocritical on my part, is my tendency back in the day to see the quality of music is where it resides at, which is just stupid. Like you have to take in consideration, oh yeah, those really good bands on those indie labels, they're probably going to get major label interest because they're really good. But back in the day, I mean, some of that stuff was disqualifiers. Oh yeah, I'm not going to listen to that anymore.
Oh, totally. Well, I'll use my friends in Portugal the Man as a big example of that. Those guys are some of my best friends. I like their music quite a bit. Had I not known them, I probably never would have listened to them, because.
And who was that?
Portugal the Man. They had one of the biggest songs a couple of years. Feel It Still.
Gotcha.
Are you familiar?
Nope. Sorry.
Come on, man.
I'm sorry.
That's another one that you have heard. I mean, it's been in commercials and movies and tons of stuff. But they started out on a pop punk label, which was just contractually obligated. It's two of the guys that were in a band called Anatomy of a Ghost that when I was touring with them when I met Emery.
Oh yeah, I remember them.
And then they signed to Equal Vision, which at that point was basically just a garbage screamo label, and then on to Atlantic, where I would have just never listened to them before. Yeah. So it really doesn't. It's hard. It's easy to have those biases, but there's always some good music.
Yeah, for sure.
In weird places.
Yeah, so let's do this, and I'll just ask you guys to give your best stab at this. So I'm gonna go with the decades that I'm familiar with are the ones obviously that I lived out. So let's take the 80s. Where in the world did the hair metal scene come from? Like, did that derive from punk? And I know there's I'm talking like this is scientific. I know it's not. It's just fun for me to ask these questions. Or did the glam did that just come out of the Black Sabbath scene for people that wanted to send their teenage girls to the concerts and to enjoy themselves? I mean, where did the glam stuff come from?
Well, you had glam with like David Bowie and like the 70s stuff. Like just glam itself was just dressing up with a lot of makeup and spandex and stuff. But I think what you're associating with the word glam was the cock rock of the 80s, where
Bon Jovi, Poison,
right. Yeah, but I think the word glam though could be used to describe the stuff that David Bowie was doing in the 70s that really wasn't all that related. It was aesthetic, but it wasn't like musically that similar.
Gotcha. So you would say metal was just or the hair metal was just a natural progression out of what? To me, it seems like it came out of nowhere. I'm like, where did that come from? That doesn't sound like anything.
I mean, I am assuming I would not be surprised if those guys were listening to punk in high school.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't know.
I'm gonna ask Michael Sweet from Stryper, because Jared, listen to this. I just got an email from his one of his agents, and they're actually going on tour. And how cool is this? They're gonna play covers of all the bands that they were influenced by in the LA metal scene.
That would answer your question.
Oh yeah.
I have a perfect example. Metallica, when they did Garage Days, they had part of that was a cover album. They covered Misfits, Last Caress. So they were, they were totally listening to punk rock.
Yeah, but see, I don't associate Metallica at all with the cock rock Joey's talking about. I mean,
neither do I. I mean, they have chops. I mean, it's different, but I think that it's the more real version of all that cock rock. But they were listening. I mean, I feel like they were listening to the same stuff.
Could be, and I also too think like bands like Dio and like later era Black Sabbath. I think those bands from like Great Britain probably also informed some of the cock rock too.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
I agree.
All right, so some of these I want to throw at you are specific bands that I really don't know a history of, and it's fun to try to trace musically, and I can't. Smashing Pumpkins, did they come from the punk scene? Like, is there earlier material like Gish and stuff more punky? That were they influenced by the grunge scene? Like, where the heck, or are they innovators?
Well, I think they're shoegaze in the sense they probably listened to a lot of My Bloody Valentine. They had those melodies. They had a lot of the distortion, but they also probably borrowed from punk too. I mean, they're definitely more aggressive, I think, than the traditional like British shoegaze band. So they kind of borrowed, I think, from both. They had that punk, like maybe aggression, at least with Gish, but then they kind of also appropriated the lush sound and thick wall of sound from shoegaze.
So is My Bloody Valentine? Would you say that's the kind of the innovators of shoegaze?
I don't know. I mean, I would say Jesus
I
and
wouldn't
Mary
say
Chain
that.
I would say Jesus and Mary Chain probably, in my opinion, based on what I've heard, is probably the first proto shoegaze band that informed bands like Ride and My Bloody Valentine and bands like that. I think.
Gotcha.
Because I think My Bloody Valentine they were around a couple years before, Smashing Pumpkins or Nirvana, but they were also contemporaries. I mean, they were around during that time.
Yeah, I think Loveless came out in 91, but they had a couple of albums before that. I think 88, 89. So, yeah, about the same time, for sure.
All right, so around the time the hair metal is so big, like I said, for our listeners' sake that may not know what I'm talking about, just reference Bon Jovi, Guns N' Roses, Def Leppard, and all them. During that heyday, what happened to punk? And I don't mean punk went away. How did punk progress during the 80s? Like, what did it turn from and go into? Because we soon got to Green Day in the early 90s. So
I got to say, so I'll jump in there real quick.
It seems like we covered some ground in the 80s to get to Green Day in the early 90s.
I would say the lineage of pop punk, I think, starts with Descendants. And Logan can maybe add another band to that. But I feel like if you listen to like their first album, I think it's 82, 83, it is so poppy. And the lyrics are about girls.
81.
Yeah, okay, 81. So I feel like that's where pop punk kind of begins. But then you also have the really fast American hardcore, which is like Black Flag, Minor Threats, Bad Brains. So you have the 70s Sex Pistols and The Clash. That's the British version of punk. And then, the late, I guess I would say early 80s, you have the more hardcore American version of punk. And so then you have the crossover, which is like the late 80s with Gorilla Biscuits, where you have thrash and punk kind of crossing over, blurring. Like Crucified's Pillar of Humanities, that's a perfect example of a crossover album. So I think you have that thrash punk combination going one direction, then you have the pop punk of Descendants through Green Day going the other direction, I guess.
Yeah.
I think.
I like that. That's super interesting. So, all right. So let's go through the 80s, and now let's look at. I think it is so unbelievable the impact of Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses and the impact of Nevermind by Nirvana, and how close those albums are on the timeline blows my mind. I mean, y'all can do the homework right now, but Appetite for Destruction is either 88 or 89. And Nevermind is either 90 or 91.
87. It's 87, 91.
So 87, 91, that is unbelievable. I mean, that to me seems like Guns N' Roses was at the end of something and Nirvana was at the beginning of something. But
well, you know who Nirvana caused the end of Guns N' Roses. And seriously,
I
I'm
agree.
absolutely
100%.
serious.
100%.
Because people are like, why waste our time with bands like Poison when we can watch Kurt Cobain slay the guitar? I mean, seriously. Why have any interest in that? That's so funny.
Nirvana, the rise of Nirvana killed glam metal.
Oh my gosh. Dude, how crazy is it? Like, I mean, Kurt Cobain obviously can't share in the glory, but to be able to say, I put an end to that because I mean, he can literally say Nirvana was so badass that people didn't want to listen to that anymore. Is there anybody that can point to a genre of music and basically say, because of me, nobody had time for that?
Yeah.
David Grohl can.
Yeah.
It's probably apocryphal, but I saw something about some interview with one of the guys in Europe that they were recording in the same studio compound as Nirvana was, and Kurt Cobain would just yell across the little lake, just talking shit to them.
Trolling them.
He's just like poking them, just like,
all right,
you guys suck.
I'm keeping rolling with the questions that I'm legit interested in, and I really don't know. So, how much credit does Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Stone Temple Pilots, how much credit do they give to Nirvana, either from breaking that scene open or from influencing them? Because I got to imagine Eddie Vedder was writing music before Nirvana blew up.
Totally.
So did Nirvana open the door wider, or how did all that stuff happen? Because that was a huge significant movement in the music industry birthed out of Seattle. So do y'all know how that happened? Like, did Nirvana just set a match to a big old thing of fire basically that was brewing, and he just set it on fire with?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Pearl Jam was necessarily around quite yet when Nirvana got their start, but I know that, I mean, some of those guys were in hardcore bands.
Yeah.
And you had
so
bands
what
like
was hardcore
Soundgarden.
back then? What was hardcore back then? Like, I don't know. In the late 80s, early 90s, what was hardcore? Because all I know about hardcore is early Tooth and Nail stuff, which is mid 90s.
I mean, Dave Grohl was in a hardcore band before he joined Nirvana called Scream that was on Discord. But,
so what did that sound like? Did that sound like Slayer, or did that sound
There's a lot of variety, dude.
Okay,
It's not quite, they don't do the full-blown screams. It's more of a yell, I would say. It's probably a little tame to some of the it's not metalcore or anything.
Like Snapcase?
I think
it's more, it's close. It's closer than that, but not. It's not. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, I think it also depends on what coast you're talking about. I think you have a New York hardcore scene that probably sounds different than like the Los Angeles Revelation Records hardcore scene. So I think you have bands that are speedy, the crossover bands like Youth of Today, Gorilla Biscuits, but then you also have, I think, the bands that are a little bit slower, like Logan's talking about, that aren't really screaming, they're more of a yell, but not quite as fast as those, thrashy crossover bands. So I think hardcore wasn't just an homogenous genre. I think it kind of was kind of all encompassing. There's a lot of different things going on within hardcore of the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
agree with that.
Discord Records too. Yeah, Discord Records. I mean, Ian MacKay's label from throughout the 80s was putting out hardcore, but had different manifestations of what hardcore meant, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, gosh, I forgot what I was. Jared, you may have to just listen to this.
You were asking about grunge, and I mean, I know bands like Soundgarden, they're out there putting out music. I think what happened with Nirvana is that the entire radio programming and MTV programming changed because of them, and that opened the floodgates to bands that were already putting out really good music and gave them national exposure. So they weren't isolated to Seattle. They were now being seen by everyone in America because we all cared now because of Nirvana. I think that might be what it was.
And didn't, Jared, when you made me that mixtape, basically it had Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Nirvana, and Stone Temple Pilots.
I think I put Mudhoney on there too, maybe.
I don't think so.
See, Mudhoney's my favorite grunge band.
So, and I have an interesting question to ask about them here in a second, what I think is extremely interesting. But basically, what I found very surprising is that Nirvana still maintained its own territory of aggression. Like, I really was shocked of how angry Nirvana came across in a way that Pearl Jam and Soundgarden did not come close to. Like, I mean, I really couldn't believe how Nirvana seemed to occupy almost like an angry form of grunge. Is that just me?
I mean, I don't really. Yeah, it might be.
Yeah.
I know what you mean. I don't really understand.
Yeah, I definitely look at like Soundgarden as being pretty aggressive, almost like metally, and Mudhoney I think was also pretty aggressive and screamy and very noisy.
So
But
here's the thing about Mudhoney is my friend Kevin, who I'm going to the Lemonheads with. I was asking him the same sorts of questions. Hey, what are albums that are must listen tos? And he named a band from Mudhoney, and amongst all these obscure lo-fi, all the way from a Built to Spill album to a Dinosaur Jr. album and all of that kind of stuff. But I always saw Mudhoney in the grunge mix, and I just found it very interesting that of all of his lists, there was no Pearl Jam, no Nirvana, no Soundgarden or anything, but a very old Mudhoney album, which to me, without doing any research, clued me in on the fact that Mudhoney probably did come from that lo-fi punk vibe, but then when grunge got big, they couldn't help but to be influenced by it, and they kind of went that way too.
I disagree. I mean,
please do, because that was no.
Mudhoney had been a band for a while, and before that there was a band called Green River that is one of the seminal grunge bands that was a huge influence on Nirvana, and before that the U-Men, another band that shared members of Mudhoney. So the timeline is, I mean, it's deep. I mean, Sub Pop was already a thriving label when they signed Nirvana.
Yeah.
With bands like Mudhoney and Green River. And so the scene was already there. It was just Nirvana that lit the match.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So a couple of bands that I don't know how to fit in this puzzle: Helmet, Tool, and those bands are probably don't belong in the same category. I don't know anything about Tool. I don't know if I could pick a Tool song out. I do remember Helmet because Jared listened to them when they were making music and still does, and recommended an album. But is that kind of an aggressive form of grunge or a different take on metal, or what's y'all's thoughts on those two bands?
I feel like Helmet probably has their roots in hardcore.
I agree with that.
Gotcha. And then I don't know if I've heard Tool. What's their story?
I never cared about Tool. I'm not the person to ask about.
So
that.
are they in the same Deftones, Silverchair, all of that stuff?
No. Yeah.
No. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't listened to too much Tool. Like I tried to get into Tool. I guess it was 2 years ago. So my friend Lee in Charleston, he sent me, because you can't stream Tool music, and so he gave me all the downloads, and I like them. I appreciate them. I think there's a rawness and a kind of an angry spirit behind Tool, which I like, but I'm not a huge fan. Like, their music is great. I think it's well crafted, but it's just something I can't vibe with. But I will say that I think lacking in this conversation is industrial music.
Yeah.
And I know that
Tool has their roots in industrial for sure.
Yeah, I can see that. And I was going to say that I think bands like, and I guess you can argue what really is industrial. I know the 70s with like, oh boy, the name escapes me now. A really very avant-garde experimental. Throbbing Gristle. So that's like probably the roots of it all. But I like more of the 80s, 90s, like Ministry, Skinny Puppy, Nine Inch Nails. I think they definitely have a place, because I think they were part of that Lollapalooza early 90s, heyday of alternative music. And I think they also kind of helped inform metal of the 90s, and also some of the pop music. I mean, Nine Inch Nails was a huge pop success in the 90s as well. So I feel like somewhere in this conversation, industrial does have a place. So,
yeah, I could see that.
And I would say for me, one of my all-time most memorable musical experiences is the first time I ever heard Ministry. And this is my friend Justin Porter from high school. He was always into the cutting edge. He introduced me to Soundgarden, Nirvana, Fugazi, all these bands. This is like late 80s, early 90s. And the moment I heard Ministry, I was absolutely blown away by how you can make electronic music aggressive. I was just blown away by that. And the album was... Go ahead.
And that was before Mortal came out, I'm assuming.
Oh, yeah, this is like probably 89, 90. And I mean, it's one of those pivotal, monumental experiences where like, this is so freaking cool. Like, it's angry, aggressive, heavy, and it's electronic. Like, this is so neat. So I really got into that whole scene. I've been listening to Skinny Puppy and Ministry for the last couple decades. So to me, very, very impactful music in my life, for sure.
That's cool. Well, I remember thinking, for some reason I heard that Nine Inch Nails and Ministry were both super satanic, so I just stayed away and I let Jared
Well,
go to
of
hell.
course
listening
you
to
heard that.
Isn't that crazy how anything the church tells you, or I don't even know if I can pin this on the church. Jared, I think maybe you even told me they were a little satanic or something. I was like, I'm staying away from that.
Okay. I mean, they're not. I mean, they're definitely dark, but I definitely would not call them satanic. But whatever.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Which one is better in your opinion, Nine Inch Nails or Ministry?
Ministry for sure. I mean, Ministry is one of my all-time favorite bands. I mean, their two albums, The Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste and The Land of Rape and Honey. To me, if you could put those albums together as one album, it'd be in my top 10. I absolutely love that stuff.
Dang.
So yeah.
So let me throw some bands at you guys. With all the research that I've done, I've got to at least share to all my friend listeners and to you guys, because all of these bands, either through an article on Pitchfork or through trusted friends or through you guys, and my personal research, Archers of Loaf is a band to check out. Bedhead is a band to check out. Built to Spill. Clinic. Have you guys listened to Clinic? It's
I have
really
listened
good.
to a bit.
Yeah. Codeine, the Delgados, Dinosaur Jr., and then some of these old school bands like Embrace, Far, the Flaming Lips. I'm getting into them for the first time. Fugazi, The Go, Guided by Voices, the Halo Benders, Handsome, Hum. That's a band that we didn't talk about. Jesus and the Mary Chain.
Did you mention Pavement?
Yes, it's coming.
Okay.
Lemonheads, Meat Puppets, The Men, Mets. Those two bands are more recent. We've got this is a band that
I used to love The Men.
Yeah, this is a band that both of y'all should check out. So my friend Kevin, he's the guy that I was talking about that's going to the Lemonhead. He said the band that he's been telling everybody about and he told me about, and I had to take him at his word and listen to it. It's Mike Adams at His Honest Weight. That's the name of the artist, Mike Adams at His Honest Weight, and it is unbelievable. It is really good stuff. What
kind of music is it?
Is he still making music? Because
I never heard of him.
I never heard of him. It was probably like maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, so he just came out with a couple of new songs, but I'm checking out all of his stuff for the first time. I'd never heard of him. Morrissey, I don't even know if that's
dude. Yes.
Yeah, it's Viva Hate. That album is so good.
Well, the Smiths. I mean, he came from the Smiths. You know that, right?
Okay, no, I did not. But okay. I never could get in the Smiths. I wanted to. I like the idea of being into the Smiths. Mudhoney, New Order, Nothing Painted Blue. That's a brand new one. I'd never heard of them. They're super old.
I've
really
never
good.
Heard of them.
Pavement, Pixies, Quicksand, Rites of Spring, Rival Schools, Sebado. Swearin' is more of a new manifestation of that lo-fi scene. Teenage Fan Club. Oh, the Thermals. I don't know anything about, but Portland. They're like a punk band that you have to listen to apparently. So I'm checking them out and really like it.
They're great. They're from Portland.
Yeah. And then
one of my old roommates lost her virginity to the singer.
Beautiful.
And then the Unrest, and the Wrens. Those are the last two. But the Unrest is really good. And it's like I'm checking out all these bands. I can't keep up with anything about them other than whether or not I like how they sound. But what are some things that you guys have to drop before we stop the convo? Like any must listens or anything that y'all were planning on bringing up about the music scene that we haven't gotten to?
Well, I'll say this. I feel like because you were so interested in the history, you should track down the book Our Band Could Be Your Life. And it is all about the indie music scene. And I'm not talking about indie rock, just independent music scene. So it started with Black Flag and SST and ends with Nirvana getting signed to a major label. And it's a very interesting read. And it covers, like, each chapter is about a band, but then also a label that is tied in with that band. And it's really interesting.
That's cool. What's it called again?
Our Band Could Be Your Life.
Our Band.
So it talks about SST and Black Flag and, Matador Records and Sonic Youth and The Replacements, which you should add that to the list if you haven't heard them. They're great.
I agree.
There are just so many. It's just such a great. It was a big tool for me when I was getting into music that I wasn't a little too young to listen to the first time around.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll piggyback on that. I know how I kind of connected the dots and filled in the gaps was, I'm not sure if your audience has heard this, but Pitchfork, they put out, the top 100 albums of the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, the 70s. So, when I kind of wanted to sort of connect the dots, I would go to those lists and pick up bands that I'd never heard before and listen to them. So that's where I discovered a lot of the older 70s and 80s bands that I'd never heard before. So I would check out Pitchfork's lists of albums for what it's worth.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I guess the last thing I want to say is everybody needs to check out the original ska band called the Mighty Mighty Boss Stones. They started everything, and guys, given the subjectivity or the delicate balance of subjectivity, and there's some factual stuff here, I love how everything just got muddied. But for some show notes, because we just all take music so daggum serious. Here's some show notes from Logan that he wanted to put out there. That basically, doing some fact checking, Jared was right that the Descendants' first album came out in '92. Second, Logan was off about that emotive hardcore. It was actually used for, that terminology was used for bands like Embrace and Rites of Spring at the time of their existence, and not retroactively like Logan said. Just a couple of things that he wanted to go in there. I'm not going to listen to this episode again because there'd probably be like 30 of those adjustments from me. But hope you enjoyed it. And don't you guys forget, for everything Pastor with No Answers and Svendsen, just make sure you go to facebook.com/bcpastor. And that is a way to keep up with everything. That's kind of the one spot that I have designated now to make sure those of you that want to keep up with these sorts of things can. So that's your one-stop place for right now. Thank you.